Imagine coming home after just a really long day out.
Okay.
You unlock your front door, you walk inside, and you just stop dead in your tracks. Your entire house has been ransacked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like every drawer is pulled out, the furniture is completely overturned, all your personal belongings are just scattered across the floor.
That is deeply unsettling.
Right. But then, as you're frantically looking around to see what's missing, you realize your cash is just sitting there on the counter.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Your jewelry is completely untouched. Your electronics are exactly where you left them. Literally nothing was stolen.
Which almost makes it scarier, I mean.
It is terrifying because it means the intruders didn't break in because they wanted your stuff. They broke in because they wanted your silence.
Yeah, that is a chilling thought.
And that incredibly dark anecdote, it's not some hypothetical scenario. That is a lived reality for the family at the center of our deep dive today.
Right.
Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack this really fascinating recent YouTube interview from the Katie Fang channel. She sat down with Skye and Amanda Roberts.
And for those who don't know, they are the brother and sister of the late Virginia Giuffre, who tragically passed away back in April of 2025.
Exactly. And they were discussing the legacy she left behind. Specifically, they were focusing on the August 9, 2026 relaunch of her nonprofit organization.
Yeah, and I just have to say, this source material is really a masterclass in the mechanics of advocacy.
It really is.
We're basically looking at the grueling, highly complex process of how this very profound, very public personal trauma gets systematically transformed into a tangible safety net for other people.
Which brings up this monumental question for you listening, right? When someone endures the worst trauma imaginable, how do they even begin to build a system so that others don't have to crash on those exact same rocks?
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. Now, really quickly, before we get too deep into the weeds here, I do need to clarify something.
Oh, right. Good point.
Because we are unpacking advocacy surrounding high-stakes legislation, and the guests in this interview share some highly politically charged commentary about specific lawmakers.
Very specific political figures, yes?
Right. So we are keeping our lens strictly analytical today. We're going to neutrally explore the mechanics of their advocacy and the lived experiences they describe. We aren't taking any political sides or endorsing any specific viewpoints here.
Exactly. We just want to understand the architecture of this family's fight, really.
Right. So looking at the architecture of that fight, it actually begins over a decade ago.
Yeah, it didn't just materialize out of thin air in 2026, which tells us a lot about the endurance you need to create systemic change.
Yeah, definitely. According to the interview, Virginia originally launched this organization way back in 2014.
Right, under the name Victims Refuse Silence.
Yeah. And then she attempted to reestablish it again in 2019. But, what the interview makes painfully clear is that doing this kind of work while you're still managing the aftermath of severe abuse is just incredibly difficult.
It's nearly impossible. The sheer physical and emotional toll that trauma takes on a person's body, it ultimately delayed the project for years.
Which is something I think society really overlooks.
Completely. We tend to expect survivors of systemic abuse to just immediately become these polished, tireless crusaders for justice.
Like superheroes, right?
Exactly. But trauma is physically exhausting. I mean, it compromises your immune system, your nervous system, your ability to just function day to day.
So true.
So this timeline we're looking at, going from 2014 to 2019 and then finally to 2026, it really demonstrates that building a systemic safety net is rarely some clean, linear progression. It's a grinding marathon.
Yeah, and that is exactly why her siblings, Skye and Amanda, stepped in as board members to carry the torch.
And they really refined the vision when they took over. They relaunched it under a new acronym.
Right, SOAR. SOAR, which stands for Speak Out, Act, Reclaim.
Yeah. And Amanda describes their core mission as being the sort of soft landing, a central hub for survivors of trafficking, sexual abuse, and domestic violence.
And when you look closely at how they actually structured the organization, they split their assistance into two very distinct tiers, which I found fascinating.
Right, the functional tier and the broadband tier.
Exactly. First, there's that functional or emergency help. So we're talking immediate cash, plugging survivors into legal networks, securing safe havens.
The immediate needs.
Yeah. And then they have the broadband help, which focuses on the long-term journey. So mental health care, funding for educational degrees, and even training programs so survivors can become ambassadors themselves.
It's a brilliant structure, honestly, because it directly addresses the actual psychology of abuse and control.
I actually want to pause on that functional tier for a second, the emergency cash side of things, because I want to push back slightly on conventional wisdom here.
Okay, go for it.
If someone has just escaped a horrific trafficking situation, they're obviously carrying immense psychological wounds.
Without a doubt.
Right, so my first instinct, and I think society's first instinct, is that long-term intensive trauma therapy has to be the absolute first step. Giving someone emergency cash almost sounds, I don't know, a bit transactional. Is financial intervention really the most effective first move?
It absolutely is. And understanding why is so key to understanding how abusers maintain control in the first place.
Okay, how so?
Well, financial isolation is almost always the bedrock of systemic abuse. Abusers control the bank accounts, right? They ruin the victim's credit. They isolate them from employment.
Oh, so they literally can't leave.
Exactly. So if you do manage to physically escape that environment, but you have $0 in your pocket, nowhere to sleep, no legal protection.
You're completely desperate.
Right. The sheer gravity of basic human survival, just the need to eat and sleep safely, it often pulls you right back to your abuser.
Wow. Okay, that makes so much sense. It kind of reminds me of a medical emergency.
Yeah.
Like if a patient comes into the ER with a massive, severe injury, you don't immediately hand them a pamphlet for a 6-month physical therapy regimen.
Right. No.
You have to stabilize the patient first. You have to literally stop the bleeding.
That is the perfect analogy. SOAR's functional tier is basically designed to act as a tourniquet. It severs that financial gravitational pull immediately.
By giving them that safe haven and the cash.
Exactly. You remove the terrifying question of, how am I going to survive tonight? And only after you've stabilized their environment can that broadband tier, the therapy, the education, the identity reclamation, actually take root.
Because you can't rebuild a psyche if the body is still in primal panic mode.
You really can't.
But, securing that initial safety is really only half the battle. Because the moment a survivor stops the bleeding, stands up, and tries to hold the people who hurt them accountable, they are hit with this terrifying amount of pushback.
Which brings us right back to that chilling anecdote we opened the show with.
The incident in Titusville, Florida.
Yes.
So, Skye shares that while they were living in Florida, in very close proximity to Virginia, their home was completely ransacked while they were out.
And like we mentioned, not a single valuable item was taken.
Just purely an act of destruction to send a message.
Yeah.
Because they were publicly naming powerful perpetrators, and this was the response.
Yeah, and this brings us to a concept Skye talks about in the interview, which he refers to as the perpetrator's playbook.
The playbook, yeah.
If we examine the mechanics of intimidation utilized by the ultra-wealthy, it rarely looks like a scene from some action movie.
Right. Direct physical violence leaves way too much obvious evidence.
Exactly. So instead, their tactic is to demonstrate access.
Demonstrating access. That is such a terrifying phrase.
It is, because it's entirely psychological warfare. By tossing a house but taking nothing of financial value, the perpetrator is communicating a very specific threat.
Like, I can get to you.
Yes. I can penetrate your most private, secure spaces whenever I choose. I don't need your money. I have plenty of my own. What I need is your silence.
Wow.
The goal is to induce a state of just constant paranoia, isolating the victim and terrorizing the support network that's keeping them grounded.
And honestly, this exposes this massive hypocrisy in how the public talks about these scandals.
How so?
Well, whenever a high-profile abuse ring gets uncovered, what's the immediate public reaction on social media? It's always this chorus of, well, why didn't the victims just name names sooner? Why didn't they go to the police?
Oh, right. We demand total transparency.
Exactly. But listening to this family's reality, doesn't that societal demand essentially place the entire burden of justice and all the physical risk of having your home invaded squarely onto the shoulders of the most vulnerable people in the room?
It absolutely does. It's a profound failure of empathy on a societal level. We're asking people who have already been stripped of their power to just single-handedly take on multi-billion-dollar networks of influence.
Which is insane.
Right. And that is exactly why the family's role, as Skye and Amanda describe it, is so structurally vital to this whole advocacy process.
Because they act as a buffer.
Yes, they become a human shield. By providing the administrative structure of a nonprofit, by amplifying the survivors' voices, and crucially, by refusing to pack up and hide after an intimidation tactic like the one in Florida.
They prove the playbook isn't working anymore.
Exactly. They absorb those shockwaves so the survivor doesn't have to take the full impact all on their own.
But, the intimidation they face isn't just physical. And it doesn't just happen back home with broken locks. What's really fascinating about this source material is how it maps that exact same wall of silence, but reinforced by totally different means.
Oh, right. The shift to D.C.
Yeah. It transitions from a ransacked living room to the locked doors of Senate office buildings in Washington, D.C.
This is where we get into the systemic bureaucratic realities of advocacy.
Exactly. So right now, the family is on Capitol Hill pushing for two major pieces of legislation. One is the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and the other is Virginia's law.
But the guests express this really deep, palpable frustration with the bureaucratic stonewalling they say they're encountering from specific political figures.
Yeah, and a significant portion of their criticism in the interview is directed at Todd Blanche. He's noted in the source material as the next Attorney General nominee.
Right, and again, just neutrally reporting what's in the interview here, the guests are heavily critical of Blanche's handling of the Epstein files.
Right. They claim he severely botched the rollout, and in the process, they say he violated the privacy and confidentiality of numerous survivors.
But the detail that truly shocked the family was when they finally got a meeting with him. They claim Blanche admitted directly to them that he hadn't even read the files.
Yeah. Katie Fang, the host of the interview, she characterizes this approach as the Trump rule of law, deny.
Yeah.
And the family views it as a very deliberate agenda to just, deny, deny, deny.
Right. They see that refusal to acknowledge the facts as a profound insult to survivors who are desperately seeking some form of truth and accountability.
So let's analyze the mechanics of that bureaucratic response for a second, because it really highlights the massive friction between procedural strategy and human reality.
Absolutely, because from the perspective of a nominee or a high-ranking official, avoiding those raw, unvetted files might be framed as a procedural firewall, right?
Like staying out of the mess.
Yeah, they might argue they're preserving legal neutrality, or they're trying to avoid prejudicing ongoing cases, or honestly, they might just be protecting their own political capital by maintaining plausible deniability.
So strategically in Washington, not knowing is actually safer than knowing.
Within that machinery, yes, ignorance can be a highly calculated defense mechanism.
Wow.
But you have to remember, to a survivor sitting across the table from them, that procedural defense looks exactly like a deliberate denial of their trauma. It communicates that the system prioritizes its own safety over acknowledging real harm done to citizens.
And the guests argue this avoidance isn't isolated to just one nominee. They also heavily criticize Senator Tom Tillis.
Right.
According to Amanda, Senator Tillis allegedly told a survivor, Danny Benke, to her face, "Yes, come to my office." But the guests state that when the survivors actually showed up and they sat in the waiting room for a respectful face-to-face conversation, the senator never met with them.
And yet they point out he later voted yes to move Todd Blanche out of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Exactly. They also bring up Kathy Rumler in the interview, and they criticize her for aggressively attacking Virginia's credibility in the past. They view that as just another calculated tactic to control the narrative.
Right, to exercise power over victims. But, it is worth noting that they also highlight moments of what they consider positive, responsive political action.
They do, yeah. They explicitly praise Senator Lisa Murkowski.
They were really thrilled that her team engaged with them directly.
Yeah. They praise her for ultimately voting no on Todd Blanche, and they specifically cite his handling of the Epstein files as her rationale for that vote.
And they also commend Representative James Comer. They emphasize that after he actually sat down face-to-face with survivors, he was moved to act.
And that contrast right there between the politicians who take the meeting and the politicians who allegedly leave survivors sitting in a waiting room, that really brings us to the core philosophical argument of the entire interview.
Yeah, Amanda states it incredibly clearly. She says, deniability is complicity.
Deniability is complicity. That phrase is just a heavy anchor. When you contrast that intimate, deeply human reality of traumatized survivors sitting in a waiting room against that cold procedural calculus of Washington politics, you see exactly what she means.
Totally. And if we break down the mechanics of that idea, it really explains why looking away is such a common tactic.
Yeah.
Because Amanda points out that lawmakers have access to documents, unredacted files, pure facts that the general public just never sees.
Right. So it's not that they don't have the information, it's that they're actively choosing not to ingest it.
Precisely. To choose not to read a file, or to choose not to walk out of your inner office and sit in a room with a survivor, That is a deliberate, active choice.
Because if you do look,
Exactly. When a person in power is confronted with undeniable facts and they have to look at the human cost right in a survivor's face, it creates this immediate, inescapable moral obligation to act. You can't unsee it.
right, and you can't unknow it.
So willful ignorance, maintaining that deniability, is literally the tool they use to fend off that moral obligation.
Because if you don't know the facts, nobody can blame you for not acting on them.
That is the political calculus. But Amanda is arguing that in the face of widespread systemic abuse, utilizing that procedural ignorance is no longer a valid defense.
Right.
Choosing not to know is an active, affirmative choice to be complicit with the perpetrators. It's what allows the system of abuse to continue completely unchallenged.
It is just a blistering indictment of how institutional power protects itself. But, what I really appreciate about this source material is that it doesn't just wallow in the frustration of Washington. The interview brilliantly shifts focus away from that high-level political sphere, and it brings it all the way down to the cultural level.
To the everyday impact this work has on the next generation.
Exactly.
Which is where systemic change actually solidifies.
Right.
You fight top-down to change the laws, but you also have to work bottom-up to change the culture.
Yeah, and Skye makes it very clear that the ultimate goal of battling all these bureaucratic walls isn't just about punishing the people who hurt his sister. It's about tearing down the reality that the rich and powerful operate under a different set of rules.
Right.
They're trying to set a firm, immovable precedent today so that when the next generation grows up, they don't inherit a world where extreme wealth automatically buys you a free pass to abuse people.
And that requires preventative education, which is a major component of the work they're trying to do with SOAR. They don't just want to react to trauma, they want to stop it before it even starts.
They talk extensively in the interview about teaching children, both boys and girls, about body consciousness.
Yeah, teaching them what consent actually means from a very young age in age-appropriate ways.
Right. But amidst all this grand talk of, changing federal laws and shifting global cultural norms, Skye shares this deeply poignant, incredibly quiet detail that just completely changes the framing of what a win looks like in this space.
Oh, the story about the woman who approaches him at their events.
Yes. Skye says that sometimes, amidst all the screaming matches on Capitol Hill and media circuses, the biggest, most profound victory happens when an 80-year-old woman walks up to him in a quiet room, leans in, and whispers in his ear, "I'm a survivor too. I've never told anybody."
The psychology of that moment is just staggering.
Right. He frames that whisper as a massive victory because he is giving that woman a safe space to finally say the words out loud, perhaps for the first time in her entire life. And he also explicitly acknowledges that she doesn't have to do anything else. Living a successful, quiet, ordinary life as a survivor is just as valid a victory as standing on a podium and testifying before Congress.
And that is such a vital message because it relieves a tremendous amount of pressure. Not every survivor has the capacity or even the desire to become some public advocate.
Nor should they have to.
Exactly. The vast majority belong to a hidden community. By validating that 80-year-old woman's silent success, SR is sending a message that survivorship doesn't have to look like a crusade. Simply surviving and finding peace is enough.
Which brings the scope of this deep dive directly to anyone listening right now.
Yeah.
Because, we are not all lawmakers drafting transparency acts. Most of us will never sit on a Senate Judiciary Committee. So how does understanding the mechanics of this family's grassroots advocacy actually intersect with our everyday lives?
It intersects because top-down accountability eventually dictates downstream cultural norms. When an organization like SOAR forces the system to stop giving the powerful a free pass, they are forcefully shifting the boundaries of what society considers acceptable behavior.
The ripple effect.
Exactly. That massive shift at the top eventually trickles down into our local schools, into how we discuss bodily autonomy at the dinner table, and crucially, into how we react when a friend or family member confides in us.
Yeah.
Supporting that macro-level advocacy is how you cultivate a micro-level environment where an 80-year-old woman finally feels safe enough to whisper her truth.
And for those who want to actively help cultivate that environment, the guests provided a really direct avenue. They pointed to their website, speakatactactreclaim.org.
Right, and they're utilizing donations to fund that vital, functional tier of emergency support we discussed earlier, the safe havens and the immediate cash.
But they also heavily emphasized a tool that costs absolutely nothing, which is amplification.
Yes. Amplification is basically the direct antidote to that willful ignorance we were talking about.
Just simply sharing their posts on social media, keeping these uncomfortable conversations alive in the public square, and helping survivors secure the visibility they need to travel and share their stories.
It's a refusal to let the silence win.
Because when you amplify a story, you are actively refusing to be complicit. You are forcing the issue into the light.
Absolutely.
And I think that brings us full circle on our journey today. We've mapped the incredible, grueling arc of Virginia Giuffre's initial trauma and traced how that pain evolved into the realization of SOAR by her siblings in 2026.
We explored the deeply psychological and physical dangers of speaking out against the ultra-wealthy.
And we navigated the complex, often infuriating reality of pushing for legislative change against the bureaucratic machinery of Capitol Hill.
What really makes this deep dive so essential is that it strips away that romanticized version of advocacy. It shows us how systemic change actually happens.
Yeah.
It is never an overnight success. It's a messy, dangerous, decades-long slog driven almost entirely by families and survivors who look at an impossible system and simply refuse to stop showing up.
They refuse to clear away the rubble, and they insist on building the lighthouse instead.
Well said.
And it leaves me with one final thought for you to mull over. If, as Amanda brilliantly argues, deniability is complicity for lawmakers in Washington who refuse to read the files, how does that concept apply to us as everyday consumers of news?
Oh, it's a tough one.
When you are scrolling through your phone and you encounter a difficult, uncomfortable story about abuse, trafficking, or systemic failure, and you quickly swipe past it just because it feels too heavy or it might ruin your mood that day, are we, in our own small, quiet way, participating in that exact same deniability?
That is a deeply uncomfortable question, and it is absolutely one worth sitting with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today, for sitting with the heavy stuff, and for continuing to explore the mechanics of our world with us. Keep questioning, keep looking closer, and we'll catch you next time.